In The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon speaks to Obi-Wan and Anakin on separate occasions about Anakin's midichlorian count, what midichlorians are, what they mean, and how they impact an individual's connection to the Force. This revelation came as a big surprise for many Star Wars fans because the original trilogy had no mention of these life forms that apparently determine a person or creature's potential to use the Force. Now, this concept actually stirred up quite a bit of controversy when it was first introduced, and has continued to create conflict among fans, because some people do not like the idea that only certain individuals can use the Force. And this is why some fans did like the idea of Rey's lineage being irrelevant, and were disappointed with the Rise of Skywalker's reveal of her true identity. But there was also the scene with the so-called Broom Boy in The Last Jedi, as well as new revelations for characters like Finn and Janna, which seem to imply that perhaps midichlorians are not the end-all be-all. So the question is, how much do midichlorians really matter, and does a character's midichlorian count dictate their relevance to the story or their ability to become a hero or villain? In this video, I'll be breaking down exactly what a character's midichlorian count means in terms of their ability to use the Force, by evaluating the counts of specific characters, and also considering what we have been told in the movies and by the creators at Lucasfilm. So first, let's establish what exactly midichlorians are. Contrary to what some people may think, everybody has midichlorians. They move through and surround every living thing, living within the cells of all life forms. But the big deciding factor is how many midichlorians live within each cell. The more midichlorians someone or something has, the stronger their connection to the Force. The average human generally has somewhere around 2,000, while most Jedi and Sith have at least 4 times that amount. As Qui-Gon explained to Anakin, without midichlorians, life could not exist. They are what allow the Jedi to sense things before or as they are happening, as the midichlorians literally speak to them. And the more in tune somebody becomes with their midichlorians, the greater their connection to the Force. So to clarify, everyone who has a high midichlorian count is not going to become a powerful wielder of the Force. All it means is that they have the potential to do so. As funny as it might sound, the best analogy I can make when explaining how midichlorians impact a person's connection to the Force is actually by comparing it to bodybuilding, and how a person's genetics dictate their potential to put on muscle. It's not a perfect comparison, because anybody can get into decent shape and put on some muscle with a proper training program and nutrition plan, whereas some people simply cannot feel the Force at all. But for those who do have a sufficient midichlorian count, this is a really easy way to look at it. In the real world, there's some people who can just work out, give a decent amount of effort, and eat pretty much whatever they want and get really good results. While another person whose genetics aren't so good could put in that same effort or even more and show almost no progress. And just like the Force, there's levels to this. So you could have 2 people who both have really good genetics, but still one of them may get even better results from the same plan because they have even better genetics. And there's obviously going to be people out there who have ridiculous DNA for building muscle but never pick up a dumbbell, so they never really make that discovery about themselves. So let's look at some examples in the Star Wars universe now. According to the Jedi Archives, Anakin Skywalker had the highest known midichlorian count, which was over 20,000, and his offspring, Luke and Leia, had an equal number. So this is a perfect place to start, because even though all 3 of these characters possessed the potential to reach nearly identical amounts of power, they all ended up in very different positions, which makes sense. Even though they all had the ability to reach the same point, in Legends, Luke was the most powerful by the end of his life. But in canon, Vader was probably the strongest, followed by Luke, and then Leia coming in at a distant third, because she only trained for a short time before giving up her Jedi path, whereas Luke and Anakin trained for most of their lives. If we continue down the list, I don't know if these numbers are official or not, but I've done some research and found the same numbers from multiple sources, and they do seem to make sense. So following the Skywalkers, we have Darth Sidious with a midichlorian count of 19,000, which again is a good example of how midichlorians are not everything, because I would argue that he was considerably more powerful than any of the Skywalkers, despite having a slightly lower count. Yoda had about 17 to 18,000, which was obviously still very high, and Obi-Wan was actually said to have a higher count than Mace Windu, despite Mace being more powerful than Obi-Wan. Yet another example of how midichlorians do not trump training. Okay, so now that we've established a good understanding, let's address the confusion that could be drawn from the sequel trilogy. Now, I know that Rey was actually the daughter of Palpatine's clone, and clones aren't really supposed to be Force sensitive, and that's all kind of confusing, so let's just stick to the basics, keep this simple, and stick with the fact that Rey is the granddaughter of Palpatine, and that's it. No cloning or anything that's just gonna throw everyone off. So if Palpatine's midichlorian count is 19,000, then we would assume that Rey's is at least that, depending on her mother's lineage and how strong her connection to the Force may have been. And Ben Solo's would be slightly higher at 20,000, the same as his mother's, assuming Han didn't contribute anything to make his count slightly higher. But either way, they both now have clear explanations for their power in the movies. Whether Rey's power made sense or not due to her training or lack thereof is a different discussion, and I'm not going to get into all of that. Now, the most intriguing factor in all of this to me is the Force dyad. If we take into account that Rey and Ben are supposed to be two halves of one whole, then that individual's midichlorian count would be around 40,000. Which means, had they been allowed the time to continue to develop, or should they reunite sometime in the future, we could see what would easily become the most powerful entity we have ever seen, outside of maybe like the Force priestesses. As far as other characters like Finn, who talked about feeling the Force and whose connection seems to be slowly growing over the course of the 3 movies, and the Broom Boy in The Last Jedi, and Jannah and Maz Kanata, and whoever else may have used the Force or felt it calling to them in some way, there's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't go against anything that was established in the previous films. Just because we don't know who their parents are doesn't mean their parents didn't have strong connections to the Force. I mean, for all we know, Finn could have a midichlorian count of 15,000, and his grandparents could have been Jedi, or they could have been smugglers, or bounty hunters, or spice runners. It doesn't matter. The fact is that his midichlorian count is high enough for him to feel the Force. Now, whether or not it's high enough for him to become a Jedi remains to be seen. But the bottom line is that all of those characters I just mentioned have a midichlorian count above average. So this is the bottom line. Everybody does not possess the ability to become a Jedi or Sith. Just like everyone can't become a world-class bodybuilder or a powerlifter or a center in the NBA. Some people have a predisposed genetic advantage to be great at things that others cannot be as good at, no matter how hard they try, and that's just a reality of life. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and that doesn't mean that everyone can't be a hero and save the galaxy or change the world. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and everyone has that ability. It's just about finding what you're good at and then pursuing it. So the whole denial and hatred toward midichlorians is kind of weird to me, because it's really just like anything else. Yeah, everyone can't become a Jedi, so what? I mean, imagine what that would do to the story if everyone could just decide to become a Jedi if they wanted to. There'd be nothing unique or special about it. Now, were midichlorians necessary in order for this concept to exist? No, they weren't. Would the story be better if they had never been mentioned? Maybe. But they don't really change anything. They just reinforce simple logic and provide deeper explanation for how things work in this galaxy, and I think that's an underrated concept by George Lucas. And the even deeper message that I like is that for those who do have adequate connections to the Force, they can outwork those with more potential to eventually surpass them, just like with most things in life. If you find that thing you're really good at, there's always going to be someone out there who's naturally better than you, but hard work will always trump raw talent. And over time, that hard worker, like Palpatine for example, will become more powerful than that more gifted person like Leia, who chose a different path. And then on the flip side, Leia became one of the best leaders in the galaxy because that's what she put all of her time and focus into. But anyhow, what are your guys' thoughts on midichlorians and the impact they have? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this video and any takeaways you might have, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Please remember to leave a like on this video to support the channel, and may the Force be with you always.